G'day, I'm Owen, you've joined the pub test, and in this episode we are continuing the Jack the Ripper Suspect series, and we're covering 2. Now, I'm giving a warning here, if you are watching with closed captions, you may just want to turn them off for this video, because we'll be discussing Oswald Puckridge. Now, when I say that, I'm not sure how YouTube will interpret it, and so you might get some inappropriate wording coming up on your devices. So maybe just turn it off, perhaps. But we're talking about, like you Canadians would understand, a hockey puck. That's what I'm saying. So it's Puckridge or Puckridge. But we're going to talk about him after we talk about William Pigot. So who was he, and how does he fit in to the Jack the Ripper saga? Well, it's debatable exactly when he was born, but it was in the 1830s. So he was around 50 years old at the time of the Whitechapel crimes. His father was a hatter, and the term mad as a hatter, because of the materials they used to send people a little bit loopy, because the chemicals they use tended to send hatters a little bit loopy, and I'm just suggesting that it's possible that chemical rubbed off on this bloke. Now, the history on him is a little bit hard to know for certain, but it said that he worked on ships, and it is generally accepted that he was a cook on a ship. But it's also suggested that at one point he owned a pub that he paid £8,000 for. Now, I don't know the truthfulness of that statement, because when we look at this bloke, it's hard to imagine that he managed to get that amount of money together all at one time, but who knows? I think it's safe to say from the subsequent events that money, if he had it, and that business probably just slipped through his fingers pretty quickly. But he did get married to Elizabeth around 1861. But now in 1881, so after roughly 20 years of marriage, she files for divorce. Now, what reasons would she have to divorce this cook? I mean, every woman loves a bloke that can cook, surely. Well, let's just look at what she filed to the court of the things that happened to her. It said he treated her cruelly, with great unkindness. So what exactly does that mean? Well, it said he frequently struck her, beat her, threatened her. He also gave her a communicable disease, she claims, during this marriage. So he was apparently off seeing other ladies at the time as well. In 1878, he tried to strangle her and throw some chairs at her. Not just one chair, but chairs plural. Also threw a carving knife and a kettle of boiling water on occasions. Yes, again, the plural. So, maybe he is in the kitchen cooking and boom, throws the knife and whatever else he can get hold of at her. Well, that's pretty bad, isn't it? But wait, there is more. He also threatened to cut her throat and shoot her with a pistol. Not too sure which order he planned to do those things, but that's a long list of reasons as to why you might want to get out of that marriage. Oddly, it would seem that the court just didn't approve of this filing for divorce, because we will jump forward before we go back to where the Jack the Ripper crimes happened. But in 1891, he got married again and got charged with bigamy, because he was still married to Elizabeth, and he actually did 3 days in prison for this. So what you had to do to get a divorce back then is beyond me. But this is a little side note, and I do think it's important to mention, but there was no women in the judiciary back then. There was, to my knowledge, no women on the police force. And when we look at the investigation of the Jack the Ripper crimes, I believe it really could have used some female eyes on the subject, because the victims were all portrayed as these unfortunates, these terrible women on the street, these women of the night. But when we look at their life story, it paints a totally different picture. even though they may have engaged in that activity, it wasn't the defining moments of their life. They were so much more than what they're painted for generally in the media. And I believe a woman's perspective, knowing what women had to do to survive, if it was that hard to get a divorce from a violent, misogynistic idiot, I would hate to think how most women were being treated. Here endeth the rant. Let's get back to William Pigot. Why did he come on the radar of being a suspect for Jack the Ripper? Well, Piggot was at the Pope's Head pub in September of 1888, not long after Annie Chapman's murder occurred on September the 8th. And he's running his mouth, defaming women and talking about the things that he would do to all women he could get his hands on. Well, the landlady of this establishment rang the police. Now, he would not be the only bloke to shoot his mouth off at a pub and say some stupid things after a few too many ales. Except this bloke had blood on his shirt, like blood stain. He also had an injury to his hand. So the police look at that and go, how'd you get the injury on your hand, buddy? He goes, well, actually, on September the 9th, so supposedly the day after Annie Chapman's crime happened, he saw this poor woman fall over having a fit. So he goes to help her up off the ground, and she bit him. That's how he got the injury to his hand, and it must have got on his shirt. Now, noting here, he hadn't changed his shirt, so maybe he didn't have that much money now to get other clothing, but that's beside the point. But the police now are very, very suspicious, and they actually take him in. They do some more investigation, and they find that he'd left a parcel near a fish and chip joint, and inside that parcel there were 2 blood-stained shirts. And then they also look at his boots that he was wearing, and it appeared that blood had been wiped off them, like someone had tried to clean up a bit of a mess. Well, Inspector Aberline himself turns up to interview Piggot and dive into this a bit more, because this is not long after Annie Chapman's crime, and so they're thinking, we've got the bloke. So they decide that they're going to put him in front of a lineup. They get 16 other blokes, so there's 17 blokes now in this lineup, because there was a person by the name of Mary Chappell. She said she saw a bloke in the Prince Albert public house not long after the Annie Chapman crime scene who had a blood-stained shirt. So they line 17 people up for her to identify the one she saw. And she says, there he is. That's the man, William Pigot. The police do put a little bit of pressure on just to make sure, and she backs away saying, well, now, you know what? I'm not 100% sure that it was the same bloke. The police aren't deterred, and they keep him in. He was still in prison on September the 30th, or at least in the watch house when the double event happened. And it was at that point the police finally decided that he had nothing to do with the Whitechapel murders. But it's also said they had to treat him for delirium and tremors, which is an indicator that he had a strong addiction to alcohol, and not getting alcohol at the time, the withdrawal was sending him really, really bad. So they treated him for that and then let him go. There is suggestion that he got locked up in an asylum later in life due to mental health, but there are some massive questions here. If he was a cook, he would have been good with a knife, particularly on a boat. He would have known how to butcher things and so forth. They found blood on his shirt. He was locked up for the double event, but does that conclusively prove that he didn't do the crime previous? Well, the police seem to think so, and they let him go. Because remembering the papers were attributing all these crimes to the same person. But I have to ask the question. They let him go because they said he had nothing to do with the Whitechapel crimes after the double event. But if the Annie Chapman case was taken in isolation, do you think they would have at least put this to trial? Did they have enough evidence? Okay, the eyewitness proved dodgy, 50-50, not 100% sure that it was him, but you've got the injury to the hand, you've got the blood on the shirt, you've got the boots, you've found some other blood-stained shirts as well of his that he did not have a good explanation for. I think the jury would have been very interested to hear that evidence. But what do you think of Piggot? Do you think he could have committed at least one of these crimes? Or is he just a misogynistic bigot? In fact, they probably could call him Piggot the Bigot, the way he carried on in his life. Not a high-end individual, but that does not necessarily mean that you are Jack the Ripper either. Which also leads to our next person, Oswald Puckridge. Or it could be Puckridge. It depends on which source you look at. He may have used both spellings in his name. I think I might just stick to Puckridge. I'm just really not going to watch this with closed captions. But he also was born in 1830, and so he was around 50 years old when these crimes happened. Yet he makes this list because Sir Charles Warren himself said, this bloke's been released from an asylum on August the 4th. We need to find him. Because Sir Charles Warren said that he had been educated as a surgeon, expressed the desire to go and rip people with a large knife, and we don't know where he is. Now this is a brief one because there's very little detail known about him, yet it is said that he was married, had some children, worked as a chemist. Now there's no record at all to support Charles Warren's claim that he trained as a surgeon, but he obviously was involved in some type of medical industry, and maybe he did make these random threats, and that's why he was put in this asylum early January 1888 in Shoreditch. But now he's released in August, as Sir Charles Warren says, and we don't know anything more about him until he appears in 1893. So he's found wandering aimlessly in Queen Victoria Street in London, and he's put in an infirmary. But then, for the next 7 years, he is in and out of lunatic asylums until in 1900, he dies of bronchitis. Now, there is no record to prove Sir Charles Warren's concern, other than the fact they were looking for a lot of people. So Puckridge, he gets named, and he was in that area in 1888. And many people believe that it would be someone like Puckridge who could end up easily being the real Jack the Ripper. Why? Well, no one knows anything about him. He didn't really stand out, and he's really not on anyone's radar. But again, what do you think of Puckridge as a suspect? See, there's no juicy evidence to pick apart. There's nothing to say exactly where he was or even if he had the skill to do it, because we just don't know those details now today. But that is a consideration of the two Ps. I would suggest that neither of them were high-class individuals, but that in itself does not make you Jack the Ripper. But let me know what you think of this one. Could Piggot have committed at least one of these crimes? Could Puckridge have just been invisible in the area during the time of the 1888 murders? So smash that comment section, like and subscribe, and the next one will be a short video as well, but we're looking at the Mary Kelly inquest, and you'll find some interesting details if you've never really looked at it, I'm sure, because it's quite intriguing, even though there's not a lot of detail, but that will be discussed in the next video, so look out for that one. I'm Owen, you've been watching the Pub Test, and we will see you on the next one.